it just makes me. So we have the in the Department of Defense, the Marines are training for this type of mission. Good for them. But at the same time, the Department of Defense continues to approve the transfer of all these technologies to China. So it's going to help China modernize to detect these small units and then kill them. Uniform, because I'm afraid, Richard, one day we're going to find ourselves in a military confrontation with China, and the fact that we are the main provisioner of their modernization effort is scandalous. We've established a policy in the United States that essentially, and it's unique to China, we invite China to divert U.S. technology, some of it very advanced, to either China's military or to Iran or to North Korea or to Russia. So the Department of Defense has a big role in this, and they are actively approving the transfer of these technologies to its most likely and capable adversary. I think the American people would be quite irate. When I was at the Department of Defense, the approval rate for NS-controlled national security or NS-controlled items was 95%. 95%. And we sell more than any other country in the world. It's wholly irresponsible. No one, like you said, no one talks about it. No one knows about it.
Welcome back to the channel Studio Asians. In today's episode, we delve into the decision by the Biden administration to withhold publishing the full report on the Chinese spy balloon incident. We'll also examine the mainstream media's silence on the shortfalls in U.S. export control policies that benefit China. Shockingly, cutting-edge hypersonic missile technology is being openly published, giving adversaries like China access to military advantages. We'll analyze the rapid modernization and preparedness gains of China's PLA forces as Western capabilities crumble. Welcome to the show.
Hi, everyone. Today, our guest is Stephen Coonen, who was the former Senior Foreign Affairs Advisor in the Office of Secretary of Defense Policy. Yes?
Yes. Thank you, Richard. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for your time. Welcome to the show. I wanted to ask you at the beginning, what do you think about the Biden administration withholding the balloon report? Because when I went through your LinkedIn, I see you have a lot of posts quite critical of the current administration. So what do you make of it? Why did they give up on this important argument?
From what I've seen, Richard, in open source reporting, is that the FBI, when they were doing the autopsy of this China spy balloon, found U.S. controlled technology in it. Of course, that's illegal. I mean, when we send controlled technology, militarily useful technology, also known as dual use technology, because it has both a civilian end use and a potential military end use. And so when we send anything that's controlled to China, it's under the conditions that it's only going to be used for civil end use. We've suspected that China has been diverting U.S. technology, controlled technology, to the People's Liberation Army, or the PLA. It's China's military. But this was really the smoking gun. So while the details, at least that I've been able to learn about, are still rather vague, the fact that they did find controlled U.S. technology should be somewhat alarming. I've personally been suggesting that to my leadership, that when I was with the Department of Defense, that this is occurring. We just don't have any proof of it, but and we can get into some more of the details if you'd like, but the United States does not have a very good end use agreement, bilateral agreement between the U.S. and China. What an end user agreement would let us do is, with every trading partner that we have, and I'm sure Poland, for example, has similar agreements with their trading partners, we say, okay, we'd like to have the ability to come and inspect, or to verify. It's called a post-shipment verification, or a PSV, to verify how our technology is actually being used. You said it would be used, let's say it's a field programmable gate array. China, you said it would be used in cell phone towers. Well, we'd like to see those being used. With every other country, we can do that for a period of 5 to 9 years. In China, I don't know who negotiated this agreement, but they certainly did not do a very good job. It's essentially useless because we can only do that post-shipment verification for up to 6 months after the item's been shipped. And then after that, we think China can do whatever they want with it. And I think we're starting to see that, not just in the spy balloon, but we're starting to see that in any type of weapon systems that they're now finding on the battlefields of Ukraine. That the U.S. technology is being illegally diverted, and we can get into more of that if you'd like.
So basically, the Chinese were spying on the US using American technology, and maybe that was just too embarrassing for the Biden administration?
Perhaps, potentially. I mean, it is fairly damning. I mean, on the administration's behalf, I would argue that this was the transfer of these technologies was also occurring under the previous administration.
Yeah, I know. It's just not like suddenly. It's been going on for some time, right?
Yeah, so it's I think maybe the reasons why the more detail. So I think there was information released. So the administration did release the fact that there was controlled technology on the spy balloon. What I would have hoped for was then, given the fact that we do not have a good end user agreement in place, given the fact that the president, the head of state of China, President Xi, Chairman Xi, has said we will divert controlled military technology if it's useful to our military. He's said this publicly. It befuddles me why the government, this administration, continues to say, well, to not take him at his word. If you want to take another thing at his word, it's the fact that he said he would. President Xi has said, instructed his military to be ready to invade Taiwan by 2027. Of course, you probably know that better than most people. So, and it is somewhat frustrating and confusing as to why the United States would continue to send militarily useful technology to a country where the head of state has said we will divert it to our military, and he has directed his military to be ready to attack Taiwan by 2027. So I find that this is a very irresponsible policy for the United States government to continue to transfer militarily useful technology to China, knowing that this is the case, and seeing that U.S. technology was in this Chinese spy balloon, and now we're finding U.S. technology on the battlefields of Ukraine.
Studio Asia is an independent channel. I am neither looking for sponsors, nor asking you for donations. I value much more your comment under this interview. It means a lot to me, a lot. Subscribing and sharing helps me to be promoted by YouTube. I will appreciate it very, very much.
Let's continue this topic. So what about Ukraine? So we are seeing US technology in Chinese arms, yes, in Ukraine.
Yes, sir. And it's not just a little bit. I mean, I think it's important to note a few things about dual use technologies. One, and we can dig into the other aspect of this more if you'd like. We're only talking about technologies that are controlled. In other words, and most normally those controls are put in place to meet some type of international non-proliferation arms control agreement that's in effect. So for conventional arms, it's the Wassenaar arrangement, and that's primarily what we're talking about here. And so it can be a laborious process, and as a matter of fact, it's even become more difficult because Russia's one of the members of the Wassenaar arrangement. So it makes implementing those controls then for any type of new technologies or what we call emerging technologies even more complicated. So we have two buckets of technology. We have the controlled technology that's been around for a while and we know what it is, but there's all this emerging technology also for which we don't even have controls. So when I'm talking about the dual use technologies, I'm simply talking about those technologies for which we've already established controls. I think personally, the much bigger problem is the emerging technologies for which we do not have controls. And I'll just make one comment about that real quick. If you consider that going back to about 18 months ago in October, when we finally started to control advanced semiconductors and the chipsets, the graphic processing units required for artificial intelligence, and then some of the semiconductor manufacturing equipment. So, I mean, those are really the crown jewels, or some of the crown jewels of U.S. technology. 18 months ago, that didn't require a license. It was just going to China without a license. It just, our export control policies, for specifically for China, are so drastically flawed and broken. It's frankly dumbfounding that we continue to let this. I think for the rest of the world, we do a very good job, but when it comes to China, we don't do a very good job. So jumping back then to the controlled side of the house and talking about Ukraine. So those technologies are where they do have controls on them. Those are what we're starting to, where China agrees that it's going to some type of civilian end use. And now we're seeing it, that it's being diverted. And one of the reasons they can do this, not only as the president of the China directed it, or the PRC, but also we don't have a mechanism in place to conduct post-shipment verification. So we've established a policy in the United States that essentially, and it's unique to China, we invite China to divert U.S. technology, some of it very advanced, to either China's military or to Iran or to North Korea or to Russia. And so when the Ukrainians started to look at these weapons that were being used against them in Ukraine, one of the first ones was actually an Iranian drone that they were able to take control of and then fly it and land it and then just take it apart, but it didn't explode. So they could see the vast majority of parts were from U.S. companies. And then there was a study that was just done. It was done in January. I think an institute in Kiev published it. 72% of foreign components found in Russian weapon systems that were being used in Ukraine came from the United States. And then
Yes.
yeah. So in that same report, then they looked at customs records
Yes.
and other records, and they determined that the 78% of the war materials that Russia was receiving to continue their attack, this god awful attack on Ukraine, were coming via China. I mean, a fifth grader could connect these dots and say, we don't have any mechanism to verify how our technology is being used. They're finding all this U.S. technology and that is being used against the Ukrainians. It's all coming, or 78% of it's coming from China. It seems that this is just that the problem is so blatantly obvious, and that the administration continues to approve the transfer of control technologies to China is just it's irresponsible. It is
Okay,
wholly
but
irresponsible.
it's not being really discussed in the public. I mean, you talk about this, few other people, but does the media pick up this topic or not? Like nobody
Oh,
talks about this?
yeah, Richard, I'm sorry, but export controls is like one of the most boring topics that you can possibly imagine. That narrative needs to change, because the minute you do start to talk about this, someone that likes to maintain the system can start to go into the details of why a specific component is controlled and the parameters involved, and why that's if that it's not a significant issue if the United States would export this electronic component or microchip to China, let's say. So it's downplayed, and it's downplayed with the technical parameters, and then they say, well, if the United States doesn't sell it, another country will. That same report, Kiev, kind of blows that argument out of the water, in that the components the U.S. components that they're finding, like from Texas Instruments, for example, or AMD, those are very specifically designed components, and they're not as ubiquitous as the lobbyists that work here to keep these exports flowing to China they're not as ubiquitous as they would suggest. They're very specific, and the reason that we're seeing so much of the U.S. technology there is because there's not a substitute for it. So it's not like these computer chips that are being produced by American companies can suddenly be obtained from a Korean company or a Japanese company. It's not possible. And so those are the components. Those are the things that we need to stop selling. That we need to stop deceiving ourselves. That oh, they're going to this a different end use. Telecommunications equipment is often the justification for transferring these types of military useful components.
And I also saw in one of your posts, you wrote that I think the hypersonic missile technology is being published open source and accessible to anyone, among others Chinese, and they use it, which means they use again our newest, latest technology against us, right?
Uh, Yeah, Richard, it's even worse than that. The Washington Post was the reporting on this, and thank goodness. I'm grateful that someone's exposed this. But it's worse because a lot of the modeling software that China used, and this was explained very well by the authors, the reporters there at the Washington Post. That modeling software was developed by the United States Air Force using U.S. taxpayer money, and there's certain export control approvals dealing with software that makes it nearly impossible to try to control that. It is possible to control it, I would argue, and that type of modeling software that was then used that China used to develop to have a breakthrough in their hypersonics program. It's unconscionable what we're doing as a nation. I hate to say this. I think this is going to continue. We can, as you mentioned, there's no attention is given to this issue. I think if the American people, or especially at least the parents or of our soldiers, our Marines, our airmen, understood that the United States government the Department of Defense has a big role in this, and they are actively approving the transfer of these technologies to its most likely and capable adversary. I think the American people would be quite irate. I think the Europeans should be quite irate that we're doing this, that we say one thing and yet we're doing another. So we talk to our European partners and allies about what we actually provide to China, and then on the other hand, we are the biggest provisioner of controlled technologies to China. It's
But actually, I think that the military personnel at least knows that, because I saw a research that said that those families where there is a military tradition, like second, third generation, they are the least ones interested in joining the military now. So it's been, let's say, the previous generation, one or two, especially the white population, those people who were kind of the backbone of the military, they are not sending their kids anymore to the military because
yeah,
they don't see a reason to die for this country, and then they feel maybe insecure seeing all this.
yeah. I think Richard, there may be some other reasons behind that. It seems under this administration, there's been other focus in the military, which traditionally has been it's designed to fight and win wars. That's its mission, full stop. And this administration is trying to tack on other political objectives, enforcing it on the military, and it's detracting from our core mission of fighting wars or fighting battles and winning wars. And I think that's been spoken about on certain news channels quite extensively. There's a gentleman, a reporter, or a host on one of the Fox News shows that just came out with a book today that's very critical of this administration and how they're turning the military into this, or attempting to turn the military into a woke institution. He's got a valid point. I mean, I was there at the beginning of this, after where they started to root out domestic terrorism in the military, in the Department of Defense, and half of us are sitting there looking at each other like, "What is this? Is weird." But you know, I guess one thing I'm retired. I was in the Army, and you just kind of at a certain point you just salute smartly and execute the mission of your elected officials. Me personally, I mean, I have a nephew that my family does not have that tradition of serving in the military. I was the first one, and now I have a nephew. He's about to become a Marine, and here this summer, and I think Marines are arguably the ones that are going to pay the biggest price for the current follies of this administration and permitting the transfer of this valuable militarily useful technology that we know China now we know China is simply diverting it to their military. And so when I was in the military, it was during the Cold War, and my government was actively involved in the export control regimes that blocked the transfer of useful technology to the Soviet Union. And now to be in a have worked for a government that's doing the exact opposite, and that it's arguably arming our adversary. It's I don't understand that, and I think if the American people realized what it was happening, they would they would they would start to question the utility of having their sons and daughters serve in the military when their own government is actively arming its adversary for the sake of the almighty dollar. National security is it's not even an afterthought. It's not even a consideration, I would argue. If it was a consideration, we would not be sending this stuff to the People's Republic of China.
You mentioned that kind of the technological challenge, how the US is trying to constrain Chinese technological development. But isn't there maybe a second bottom to it? Because I think it's easier and cheaper to challenge China on the technological field. Because what the US could also do, maybe once every while fire back when the PLA is provoking the US jets
Mm,
or in the South China Sea, or maybe dock an aircraft carrier in Kaohsiung in Taiwan. So my
right.
point is, instead of doing something really more substantive, they just go the easier route and they just go for technology and not even that, as you just said. So isn't this choosing the lesser evil or the easier way, whereas actually what they should be doing, putting really hardware in the Indo-Pacific and challenge China and fire back maybe one day when they are being provoked again and again.
Yeah, yeah. Coincidentally, Richard, I saw your interview from about 5 months ago when you talked to Brent
Oh,
Sadler.
yes.
Brent is a good friend, and we were colleagues. We met at the National War College, over a decade ago. I I liked his answer to this question, and so I would just repeat what Brent told you 5 months ago. I think, we're obviously don't want to unnecessarily provoke or have an incident, but at a certain time, you do want to at least be in a position where if an accident does happen, and I think this would arguably be can be considered to be an accident, although. And I don't know if Brent said this, but others have said this. They're basically doing their battle drills. They keep doing this over and over and over to see how the U.S. is going to react. And so maybe to keep our cards close to our chest from a tactical standpoint might be a good idea. I think there's some strategic shortcomings associated with doing that, with not having a harder stance. It's, I think, caution. I'll give the administration credit for being somewhat cautious in that regard, specifically to these near misses in the South China Sea or the East China Sea, for example, or what they're doing to the Philippines. I think we are establishing a more, with the Philippines, for example, we are more actively involved in that. Why we're not, joined at the hip with a treaty partner is I don't understand that, and maybe eventually we'll get to that point. I just think the sooner we do that, the better. I think what one of the points that Brent would and many others have pointed out is that we've let our military atrophy to such a point that it makes doing that a lot much more difficult. So that defense industrial base that we're so reliant upon has just atrophied to not a very good state. And this administration, once again, is sticking its head in the sand and largely ignoring it. There's a
Yes,
lot of people.
we're seeing this with the AUKUS agreement. The US, North Australia has the infrastructure, the engineers, the money. Like we are being, like the West, outperformed in every possible way. The Chinese have the commitment, money, resources, engineers. We gave up everything. It's all in Asia. So it
Yeah,
looks really, really, really bad.
yeah, yeah. I was working with a client, a Korean client, and we actually had that conversation about, so given the dearth of U.S. shipbuilding capability, that could be an opening for even a country like Poland that at least has some history and capabilities there for doing this, because it's, at least in the immediate term, because it's going to take, it's not, this isn't going to be built overnight again in the United States, just like we're realizing with the semiconductor industry. This is going to be a long, it won't happen overnight. It's going to take several years, decades maybe, to get back to a point where we can, from a national security standpoint, where we have secure supply lines and equipment and materials that we need to build a capable defense. We don't have it today anymore.
A lot of people dismiss the PLA, no battle experience, bad quality, blah, blah. But what do you think about the quality? They have a lot of hardware, a lot of stuff. What do you think? How does it work? I mean, at least they are using US kind of stolen US components or blueprints. So is this really good quality? How would you evaluate it?
They're they're very smart. They're learning, and it's not necessarily even stolen capabilities, because again, we're willing to sell them what they actually need. If you look at even our most advanced fighters, for example, it's all the microchips. I mean, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to read Chris Miller's book
No,
called Chip
I
Wars.
know it, but I didn't read it.
Oh my goodness, I was not expecting that something as what sounds on the surface dreadfully boring could be so riveting. It is I highly recommend it, Richard. It is a great book, because by just saying that, if you've, for those that have read it, they appreciate then it's all of our, most of our military advances, if not all of them, I won't say all, but it's got to be an enormous percentage, are based on the microprocessor. And so if these semiconductors are what's the really the key ingredient, if you will, to our most advanced technologies. And so that we finally have gotten a handle on that to a certain degree is good, although we're dismissing the legacy type of semiconductors, which are just as critical to a military. So I think China's obviously getting there, and we're helping them. We're still, you have companies like Lam and AMD that are still selling so-called legacy semiconductor manufacturing equipment. So again, it's not, they don't need to steal this. What they have stolen are like the plans to the F-35, and then you see that mimicked in their aircraft. It's not, they can't learn everything just by reading a blueprint, because there's special manufacturing capabilities and methods that you can't learn from simply reading a blueprint. And so they're behind in some of those areas, especially when it comes to like our gas turbine engine technologies. Our engines last so much longer than any other engines in the world. We Because we've mastered that hot section technology, so that we can fly for much longer. That our engines will last a much longer period of time. That China's not there, but they're learning every day, and they're getting better, and that we're providing them with the technologies to help them learn. It's just, again, it's when it's clear. I mean, I've heard others say this, and I just happen to agree with them wholeheartedly. We're in a Cold War. We did not start this Cold War, but to ignore that we're in a Cold War, that she's already made it clear what his ambitions are, And he does not appreciate this liberal world order that based on a market economy that is that the U.S. has championed for 70 years, and suddenly we seem to be not abandoning, but apathetic about its continuation. I mean, if we were concerned, don't think we'd be assisting China to the degree that we are with these dual use technologies. And I think that's why people don't. It's not covered in mainstream news because it doesn't capture the imagination of the people. But if they understood that this is China's doing what they're doing largely, especially when it comes to military capabilities, off the backbone of American technology, I mean, I don't think we would be supportive of that.
If you believe in me, please like it, leave a comment and share the show with friends. It might not look like it, but I have quite a lot of expenses. I am not asking for money, only for support. The goal of this program is to spread the knowledge.
So as a result of all of this, you then resigned in protest, yes, from your job. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that? Why was it so bad?
Well, at the time, now this is slightly over 2 years ago already. It became clear as I was looking at export control license. So I would review export control license, but again, I was one person for the Department of Defense doing this, and there's other stakeholders in the U.S. export control arena. So the Department of Commerce oversees the system, and of course their interests are aligned with industry, and that's because that's the mission of the Department of Commerce is to maintain a robust industry for the United States so that it continues to be an economic viable country that we can sell and advance our economic interests. And then there's the Department of State that looks at issues from a foreign policy standpoint. Would a transfer of these dual use technologies advance our foreign policy objectives in a certain country? And if they're a partner or ally, the answer is obvious. Department of Energy also looks at it if there's nuclear power type implications involved. And then the Department of Defense also is involved because they look at they're supposed to look at the national security implications associated with our transfers. Again, for Russia, for North Korea, Iran, we have appropriate policies in place. For our partners and allies, we have very good policies in place. The export control system, I can't think of a better system to have. All the stakeholders get to look at these transfer requests, and we get to have a say. And it really is an opportunity to even help our partners and allies have more meaningful capabilities. But when it comes to China, so when I took over, I had the India portfolio, which was a lot of fun. India was one of our new partners that were non-traditional partners in the Indo-Pacific, and we were trying to do a lot of exciting things with them. But they were bringing they had this Russian legacy equipment, which created some challenges. But it was really neat working with our Indian partners. They're good people to work with. And then I was asked to take over the China portfolio, and you start to look at the record of approvals, and the Department of Defense is supposed to be looking out for the national security equities. But when new leadership took over, that had actually the director of DITSA had been at DITSA his entire career. He was the deputy, but we had the director was actually very much of a China hawk, but didn't really understand she'd come from the Air Force and didn't understand the complexity of export control laws and rules and procedures and how we work within the interagency. So, but it was we're making some meaningful policy changes within the Department of Defense to try to get a grips on this. For example, there's deemed exports to when you transfer knowledge to a foreign national. That's also, if it's controlled knowledge, dealing with controlled technology, then you need to submit a transfer request. So you have a lot of your big tech companies, they're working on some novel types of technologies, and there's a lot of Chinese foreign nationals involved in those industries. If they're U.S. citizens, it's not an issue. But if they're still Chinese nationals, that becomes an issue. And if you start to look at some of these Thousand Talents programs and know some of the history behind how China is using the Chinese diaspora, sometimes quite viciously, by threatening their
Yes.
family members that are. So you're familiar with that, then, Richard. I won't go into those details. But for example, we're trying to implement a policies where if it was a critical technology, that there would be a policy of denial if it was to a Chinese national, just given that history, because we couldn't be certain who was a risk and who wasn't. And but then that was immediately shut down once our new director moved on, and we got a new director. And so it became obvious that we were going to go back to business as usual. Rubber stamp, DoD would rubber stamp these transfers. And if you look at the cases, so if that are escalated. So if one of the departments, the stakeholders in the export control community disagree and want to deny a transfer, they can do that. And then if it's still over, it's still almost always overturned in the initial review that's done at the operating committee. It's run by the Department of Commerce, and they get an extra vote. So even if all three, State Department, Energy Department, and Defense, say deny it, Commerce can say, no, we're approving it and we're going to escalate it. So it's really a broken system skewed in favor of industry, which in certain cases makes sense, but not when it involves transfers to China for all the reasons that we've just discussed beforehand. And so it's so having worked in that, and you can imagine the frustration then. If my own leadership, if as the previous director did, supported the efforts to try to deny some of these, and then was willing to fight. She was willing to escalate the cases. She even took some of them to the cabinet level. So we had to get the Secretary of Defense involved with the other secretary. She was willing to do that because she understood the national security implications. The new leadership, obviously, I don't know why they shifted course, but it's as though we took a massive step back away from meeting our national security obligations. And so, in my last note back to the leadership, I was encouraging them to try that we did have an obligation, to every man and woman that puts on this uniform, because I'm afraid, Richard, one day we're going to find ourselves in a military confrontation with China, and the fact that we are the main provisioner of their modernization effort is scandalous. I, I can't believe that as an American I'm saying this, because it just seems so implausible. But yet, I mean, it's just those are the dispassionate facts. We sell more controlled technology. We're finding it all over on the battlefields of Ukraine, and the spy balloons that are used against us.
It was used against the Americans on the Red Sea. Was also U.S. weaponry, right?
Yes, thank you. Yes, for reminding me. Yeah. So yeah. So that was going on, and I thought I can't keep working for leaders that ignore this problem. My last email was actually to the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, and I said, "Hey, I'm your China expert when it comes to export controls to China, and your department is failing.
Wow.
Provisioning its greatest adversary." And I kind of took a break, and then some of my old colleagues reached out to me and introduced me to some congressional staff members that had shared the same concerns that I do. Brilliant. These congressional staff members are they're young, and they've come from great schools, and they're just great Americans, great patriots, and they're extremely intelligent, but they don't understand the and don't have the experience working with the bureaucracies in those export, and especially when it comes to something as exciting as export controls. And so I started to work with them and try to help them. But that's, I think, what I ended up learning from this 2 years of doing that is the bureaucracy behind this, our U.S. export controls, is so massive. Not, I mean, I think President Trump described it quite accurately as the swamp. I saw it firsthand, where when he tried to enact some more restrictive export controls, people just waited him out, said, we're not going to do this. Or when Congress said, we're going to start controlling emerging technologies, this bureaucracy will just wait these people out. And it's so convoluted and can be confusing, but the administration could cut right through this through the National Security Council and just say, these are the policies we're no longer going to approve, for example, certain types of technologies. And I'll just give you one example, Richard. There's certain technologies that are controlled. There's various reasons for control, normally depending on the multilateral non-proliferation regime that supports it. So there's missile technologies because they support the Missile Technology Control Regime, or the Australia Agreement if it involves chemical weapons. There's the Nuclear Suppliers Group for nuclear materials, and then the Boston Arrangement then for conventional materials. So that will help to establish reasons of control. So there's one control that's called national security controls. And if you look at the Export Administration Regulation, it defines a national security control, as a technology that provides a significant, this is quote, significant military capability to the recipient nation. So again, for our partners and allies, knock themselves out, send as much as we want. They need this stuff, good. But to send it to China, a significant military capability, I don't understand how we could do that. And so that was one of the things I was trying to get members of Congress or their staff members to agree to. And I mean, logically, it seems quite logical that we would not, as a country, provide a technology that provides significant military capability to our adversary. But yet, that's exactly what we're doing. When I was at the Department of Defense, the approval rate for NS-controlled national security or NS-controlled items was 95%. 95%. And we sell more than any other country in the world. It's wholly irresponsible. No one, like you said, no one talks about it. No one knows about it because export controls is boring. So, who knows what the reason is, but.
Yeah, that was actually something I wanted to ask you about. Yeah, I mean, what could be the reason? I mean, and it comes only, maybe you don't need to answer, but to my mind, like it's either ideology or money. I mean, what could it else be? I mean, those people are not stupid.
Right. No, that's a great point, and this was probably my biggest problem within my own organization, was that they would look at this export administration regulation. And again, it's very specific, the parameters under which a technology is controlled, and then it has the conditions that would be met for China, for example, to approve it. And if they would say, if it's not going to be used, I'm paraphrasing, if it's not going to be used for the military, then it can be approved. There's a presumption, and they even I can't discuss the details because there's actually a National Security Council meeting where they had discussed perhaps amending one of these controls, and they did amend it. And so, but they totally missed the mark because, again, they waited out the old leadership left, new leadership came in, and the way they amended it was, if the technology is going to, again, I'm paraphrasing, if the technology will be used for a military capability, it is denied. Well, I would hope so. Yes, that's always been the policy. They didn't change anything, but everything else can be approved. So if the Chinese end user says, we're going to put this in, we're going to use this carbon fiber filament that in brake shoes, right? But it's the same carbon fiber that can be used to make the nose cone of a ballistic missile. Exact same material. So, and we need so many tons of this stuff to make. It was obvious this isn't me. This is the engineers that I had the great pleasure of working with while I was at DTSA. They would say this is much more material than they need to make these brake shoes. This is very problematic, and so that became, that was one of the issues then, that it just, like, why do we approve these transfers?
Okay.
I'm sorry, Richard. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, you did. I mean, yeah, thank you. Very great answer. I appreciate it. Very honest. My last question would be: we are now in mid 24. What would you be focusing on or researching in 24, 25? What do you think is coming at us?
Well, I kind of intimated some of the things I was doing with Congress, and I was very hopeful that with this NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act for this year, that we might be able to, that Congress might be able to get like a national security policy of denial and legislate it and force it down the administration's throat, make them start to at least deny capabilities that provide a significant or technologies that provide a significant military capability. But what I learned is that still while it was still in committee, there were certain members that were unwilling to do that, and so that was that was really somewhat of a blow and very frustrating. That you could just have you know what needs to be done for the country. It's kind of like the TikTok dilemma. Why this is a no brainer? Why are we even debating this? But nonetheless, that's what happens in a democracy. So you had just a few members on the committee. It was the House Foreign Affairs Committee that were able to hold this up, and so you become somewhat disillusioned. And in the meantime, my wife is French, and so we were actually in the process of getting a little apartment in the French Alps. That's 100 in Briançon. It's 100 yards from the ski lift that takes you up to Serre Chevalier. So I think I'm going to focus. We're focused primarily on getting ready to move to France here this summer, and yeah, so that's. But every once in a while, I'll still, the Wall Street Journal will publish something like last week. It was a very interesting article on how the Marines are doing these small unit tactics and engagement drills, if you will, with in this case the Philippine military, and that they're operating quite close to Taiwan, presumably in an effort if there was an invasion that we're going to use small. I mean, the Marines have kind of laid out this small. I've read where they've readjusted some of their tactics for trying to inhibit the Chinese if should they. I mean, I think it's inevitable that China's going to make a military play on Taiwan before 2027. Or it's not. I'm just repeating what the previous three Indo-Pacific commanders have said. So they're smart people. That's why they got to be 4-star admirals. I think they know what they're talking about, and I happen to agree with them. So I was reading that article in the Wall Street Journal on about how the Marines are doing that, and it just makes me. So we have the in the Department of Defense, the Marines are training for this type of mission. Good for them, but at the same time, the Department of Defense continues to approve the transfer of all these technologies to China. So it's going to help China modernize to detect these small units and then kill them. So I can't, Richard, as much as I'd like to sometimes just shut it off. I've given it the try, and but I can't. It's maybe because I wore the uniform. It's just what we're doing is wrong, and I hope that one day that we can change these policies. I just hope it's not too late. Because they've already been able to do a lot with lidar. There's so much that we've helped the Chinese do with our own and we were the ones that had it, and then just end up giving it away. Other people have written about this and are much more knowledgeable than I am, but it's just frustrating to see that. And again, I hope we're not too late, but I'm afraid that it's going to take like an invasion of Taiwan before the lights come on, and our leadership does will then be shutting the barn door after the horses have got out. So yeah, but so I don't really. My future plans are to move over to France and get some good skiing, and so I'm praying for good snow. But I'm just looking for other opportunities to continue to serve and inform.
Sounds like a great plan. Okay, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. It was really fantastic.
Oh,
Thank you so
yeah,
much.
Richard, thanks again. Anytime I get a chance to talk to folks about what's going on, because most people don't know, or it's underappreciated, I always like to have that opportunity. I just wish some other knowledgeable people would push back and say, no, this is where you're wrong, Steve. But no one ever does, and it's just, yeah. So thank you for the opportunity to present
Thank
some
you
of
for
these
your
issues.
time.
I have so many other explosive interviews on this and similar topics. Please check out my channel.